Karen thought she was untouchable. Waving her coffee cup like a scepter, she mocked the royal guard, convinced that her tourist status gave her the right to anything, even to humiliate him. But when her careless gesture spilled hot coffee onto his pristine uniform, his response was so powerful and unexpected that the entire crowd froze in stunned silence. What happened next not only shattered her arrogance but also left a lasting mark on everyone present. Let's start from the beginning. Buckingham Palace, as it did every morning, welcomed crowds of tourists who flocked there with a single purpose: to marvel at the spectacle of the royal guard. Cameras clicked non-stop. Children laughed and pointed while parents did their best to keep them from crossing the white line. Everything seemed typical: a crowd from various countries, the hum of conversations in dozens of languages, and the leisurely movements of tour groups. Amid this festive commotion, the guards stood as the embodiment of absolute order and discipline. Their red tunics gleamed in the sunlight, and their tall, bearskin hats completed a majestic image that demanded admiration. Every tourist knew. They stood as motionless as statues, and this stillness was what made them so mesmerizing. This order and rigidity seemed to stand in stark contrast to the chaos of the modern world. And amidst this refined symphony, she appeared. Karen. She was impossible to miss. Bright pink leggings clung tightly to her figure, paired with a colorful blouse that couldn't be called fashionable, but could certainly be called loud. Her ensemble was topped off with an oversized coffee cup and nails resembling the claws of some predatory bird. Karen walked with a confident stride, as if Buckingham Palace wasn't the attraction, but she herself was. Her gaze swept over the crowd with barely concealed disdain. The people with cameras, neatly staying behind the line, were nothing but contemptible to her. "Amateurs," she muttered under her breath, not bothering to grant them a full glance. To Karen, all of this was nothing more than a backdrop for her grand plan. She knew exactly why she was here. Her plan was simple, as all brilliant ones are: get the guard's attention and make him react. Rules? Boundaries? She didn't care about any of that. This was her moment. Karen already envisioned the scene in her mind: the immovable guard, succumbing to her charisma, smiling, or better yet, speaking. It would all be caught on video and instantly go viral across social media. Likes, comments, millions of views, that was her true goal. Opposite her stood a young guard named James. At 25, he was the epitome of discipline. Tall, fit, with impeccable posture and piercing blue eyes, he stood as still as a statue. His face was utterly calm. Not cold, but focused. Every detail of his appearance, from the shine of his crimson tunic to the flawless fit of his bearskin hat, commanded respect. It was as if he existed in another dimension, untouched by the chaos around him. But to Karen, he was merely a prop. In her eyes, James was no more than a theme park performer, whose job was to cater to the whims of the visitors. She stepped closer to the line, ensuring her voice carried across the square. "Hey, soldier boy, smile. This is a show, isn't it?" The crowd fell silent. People who'd been engrossed in taking photos turned their attention to Karen. Someone standing nearby couldn't help but whisper, "Is she serious?" James, of course, didn't so much as blink. His gaze remained fixed ahead, his face completely unmoving. But in his calm demeanor was such confidence that Karen, for the first time, seemed to feel slightly uncomfortable. Her voice rang out again, louder and more demanding this time. "Hey, can you hear me? I'm talking to you." But James remained unyielding. And here, for a fleeting moment, something else was felt. An almost invisible but undeniable line between the guard's majestic calm and Karen's chaotic, slightly pitiful figure. She stepped forward again, ignoring the murmurs of disapproval from the crowd. Her footsteps echoed on the cobblestones, and her coffee cup swayed slightly in her hand. Karen was certain the world around her was supposed to bend to her will. But does the world always follow her rules? Not receiving the response she wanted from the guard, Karen decided it was time to take more drastic action. Rules? Boundaries? The white line? None of that mattered to her. For people like Karen, anything that doesn't fit into their worldview is automatically deemed irrelevant. She stepped over the line with the kind of overconfidence typical of people who are certain they'll never face consequences. The crowd collectively flinched, as if someone had abruptly muted the background noise. A few people gasped, and an older woman with a camera exclaimed indignantly, "Ma'am, you can't go there." But Karen, of course, didn't even glance back. Her voice carried a mocking tone. "Well, Hat Man, can you hear me now?" She pointed at the guard's bearskin hat as though it were something so absurd it deserved ridicule. The very thought that this man could ignore her struck Karen as laughable. She laughed, loudly and theatrically, seemingly trying to declare to everyone around her, "Look at me, I'm the one in charge here." Some of the tourists, though clearly disapproving of her actions, couldn't resist pulling out their phones. After all, what could be better than capturing someone else's disgrace? A man with a mustache and a large camera lens muttered, "He's a soldier. Show a little respect." Karen spun around at his comment, her face briefly losing its smugness before filling with irritation. "Respect? I paid for this vacation. These people are here for us, the tourists." And with that, she reached the peak of her arrogance. She genuinely seemed to believe that having a ticket to London automatically crowned her royalty and made the guards performers in her personal show. Her voice grew louder, her gestures more unruly. She waved her coffee cup inches from James's face, almost as if testing his patience. The crowd began murmuring louder. Someone was definitely recording her on video, while others whispered outraged remarks to their companions. Yet, no one stepped in. The tension in the air was palpable, as if everyone was waiting to see how this would end. "Come on, at least blink," Karen shouted with a taunting tone, her voice almost a command. James stood rooted to the spot. His gaze, cold and focused, remained fixed straight ahead, as though he were carved from stone. His face was perfectly still, as if he hadn't even registered the scene unfolding before him. The majestic calmness in his stance seemed to answer the chaos that Karen personified. And here, dear reader, the contrast couldn't have been more striking. On one side, there was calm, poise, and absolute discipline. On the other, there was Karen, the embodiment of modern egocentrism, her audacity as loud as her voice. At this point, you're probably thinking, who behaves like this? It's just beyond the pale. And you'd be absolutely right. But moments like this reveal the stark difference between steadfast composure and unrestrained chaos. Karen, of course, wasn't aware of how ridiculous she looked. To her, this was all a game she still planned to win. He has to do something, she thought. I'll get what I want, he can't just stand there. But as we already know, royal guards don't become symbols of tradition and honor for nothing. James remained steadfast, while Karen continued digging herself deeper into the pit of her own humiliation. Karen, frustrated by the guard's silence and the disapproving looks from the crowd, began to lose her composure. Her voice grew louder, and her movements became increasingly erratic. She waved her coffee cup like a conductor leading an orchestra, only instead of music, the air was filled with irritation and ego. "What's wrong with you? Are you a robot?" she shouted sarcastically, leaning in to peer at his face. And then it happened. Something no one, not even Karen, had anticipated. Her coffee cup jerked sharply, as if to emphasize her last words, but she tilted it too far. In an instant, hot liquid spilled onto the guard's gleaming crimson tunic. A dark stain spread across the fabric like ink on marble, instantly shattering its flawless appearance. The crowd gasped. Some covered their mouths with their hands, while others nearly dropped their phones as they filmed the scene. Whispers and sharp intakes of breath gave way to complete silence. It was as though even the cameras had frozen in the tourists' hands. "Oh, come on, it's just coffee," Karen stammered, taking a step back. But her voice, usually loud and commanding, faltered. She clearly hadn't expected things to escalate this way. At that moment, James moved for the first time. His boot hit the cobblestones with a resounding thud, breaking the silence like a thunderclap on a clear day. His voice, low and firm, echoed across the square. "Step back behind the line." The shout, so powerful and unexpectedly loud, drew an immediate reaction from the crowd. Some people instinctively stepped back, others held their breath. And Karen, she froze. Her eyes widened in shock, her mouth slightly open, but no words came out. For the first time, she found herself in a situation where she had no idea how to respond. You can't talk to me like that," she finally managed to blurt out, desperately trying to reclaim a shred of her former confidence. But her voice was shaky, sounding more like an attempt to convince herself than the guard or the onlookers. Meanwhile, James had already returned to his original position. His posture was as impeccable as it had been before the incident, but now his gaze carried a subtle but unmistakable sternness. Once again, he was perfectly still, as if nothing had happened. But for the crowd, everything had changed. Their reaction was swift. One tourist murmured under his breath, "Wow, serves her right," another said, this time louder. Gradually, applause began to ripple through the square. Someone clapped, then another, until it became a wave. It was a mix of admiration and relief, as if the crowd collectively felt that justice had been served. The videos being recorded at that very moment, capturing every second of the incident, were sure to flood the internet within hours. Karen, meanwhile, stood there, staring at James with a dazed expression, as though she couldn't comprehend how her show had so spectacularly backfired. Even as the applause and whispers filled the air, James remained unfazed. His tunic was stained, but his dignity was untarnished. This was his duty, to uphold tradition and maintain composure. And he had done it as only a true professional could. That same day, the incident at the gates of Buckingham Palace became an internet sensation. Videos captured by tourists flooded social media, spreading like wildfire. Headlines lit up screens everywhere. Karen challenges the royal guard and loses. Guard maintains composure in the face of rudeness. And, of course, hot coffee, cold response. The algorithms of YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter latched onto the clips, propelling them to viral status. The comments under the posts were sharply divided into two camps. One group showered the guard with praise. "This is what true composure looks like. That guy's a real professional. Way to go, James. A lesson for people like her. The Royal Guard never disappoints. Bravo." The other group unleashed a storm of criticism aimed at Karen. "This is just embarrassing. How can someone behave so horribly? When did people lose all respect for culture and tradition? She thought she could do whatever she wanted. Maybe next time she'll think twice before acting up." Karen's face, flushed with them, anger and confusion, quickly became a meme. In one, captioned, "When you think you're the star, but reality slaps you in the face," Karen stood with her coffee and a stunned expression. Another, featuring a stern James, bore the tagline, "Respect for tradition isn't a joke." Karen, of course, hadn't anticipated this turn of events. Her social media accounts were flooded, not with likes and compliments, but with thousands of critical comments. Friends who had once supported her antics now stayed silent or responded with sad emojis. Meanwhile, James became a hero. Messages of support poured in from around the world. People expressed gratitude for his patience, professionalism, and ability to maintain dignity in the face of such ridiculous and blatantly rude provocation. One person wrote, "You don't just stand at your post, you embody the essence of British tradition." Another shared, "My grandfather served in the Royal Guard, and I'm proud to see that the spirit of honor lives on today." The Guard was even invited to several interviews to discuss the incident. But James, in true professional fashion, declined them all. To him, it was just part of the job, and he didn't consider what he had done to be anything extraordinary. His brief comment to the official Royal Guard account summed it up perfectly. "My duty is to maintain composure and uphold tradition. Nothing more." This statement only deepened the respect people had for him. For Karen, however, the consequences were far more painful. She hastily left London, cutting her vacation short. Even at the airport, people looked at her with smirks, recognizing her as that woman with the coffee. She deactivated her social media accounts and seemed to retreat into obscurity, at least for the time being. The conclusion was clear to everyone. James, standing tall under the British sun, resumed his post at the gates, radiating professionalism and dignity. Karen, having lost her confidence, learned a valuable lesson. Tradition is not a spectacle, and respect is not optional. It is an essential part of the civilized society.